Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to your final topic area for Unit 3. This is 3.2, just in time for your controlled assessments hopefully. Right, let me make myself smaller. Alright, so this one is Draw Conclusions from Information, Unit 3, 3.2. What I got my students to consider first of all was what could make a trial unfair, and then can they give specific examples for this. So any trials that we've come across that they think were unfair, and then why might there be more not guilty verdicts when decided by juries rather than ones decided by judges and magistrates. So why do juries vote for not guilty in more cases than the judges and magistrates? Is there a fairness thing to play there? And so in this topic, we need to draw conclusions from information about criminal cases in relation to just verdicts, miscarriages of justice, safe verdicts and just sentences. So there are your conclusions. The conclusions of a trial. Have they come to a just verdict? Have there been any miscarriages of justice? Are the verdicts made safe? And is there then just sentencing that goes along with this? We need to develop skills to analyse information and to be able to draw conclusions based on reasoned evidence. So the evidence that has been presented, have the conclusions been drawn fair? Have the verdicts and the sentences, are they just? And so this topic brings together all the things that we've learned in Unit 3. So number 1, just verdicts. By definition, it's a verdict that is in line with the law and the person on trial deserves the verdict drawn. So the verdict is guilty, not guilty. It does justice according to the facts in the case. A verdict should find someone guilty if the facts of the case indicate they are guilty, and innocent if they do not. There are examples of where our criminal justice system has clearly failed to give just verdicts. And then I got my students to think of any examples where this was the case. Any verdicts that were given were guilty, not guilty, where it just wasn't just. So, for example, a good one that my students often discuss is the Amanda Knox Meredith Kircher case. With all the evidence that was there, was the verdict just? And obviously there was many different verdicts that were made over the period of time for that one. Jeremy Bamber, with the evidence that they actually had, with the witnesses that were called, was the verdict just that he was guilty based just on the facts in the case? How about the verdicts that were towards people that we know now were innocent? Was there enough evidence to find them guilty? And one area that you could discuss is double jeopardy. Now, if you remember, it wasn't until 2003 that someone could be acquitted of a crime. They could not be prosecuted for the same offence twice. So beforehand, it used to be that if you were prosecuted for an offence, you could not be prosecuted for the same offence again. And I discussed with my students why this might have been seen as a fair law at the time. And obviously the reason this was there was because you couldn't harass somebody. You couldn't, a person, when they've been prosecuted and found not guilty, you can't then keep going after that person. If they're not guilty, they're not guilty. But the problem was, in some cases, the evidence that the not guilty verdict was just unjust. So if when the defendant later admits the crime or when new evidence is found. And this was the case with Billy Dunlop and the murder of Julie Hogg. And you may have looked at this earlier on in the course. Julie Hogg was murdered by Billy Dunlop. Billy Dunlop got away with it for the first time. He then bragged about it when in prison for another crime. And because the double jeopardy was there, they couldn't try him again until her family got involved. So Anne Ming, her mother, campaigned to have the double jeopardy rule changed, and she won that. So in 2003, as it says, the law was then changed. This meant that in the case of Stephen Lawrence, things were able to change. So due to the Macpherson report in 1999, the Criminal Justice Act amended the double jeopardy law in 2003. Look at the time difference though. Laws take so long to be put into place. So the Macpherson report was the one that led to, or was part of, changing the law in 2003. This meant that Gary Dobson and David Norris could be convicted based on the new evidence. So the fibres that were found, so there was new evidence found against them. If double jeopardy was still in play, they could not have been prosecuted for the same crime, even though new evidence had come to light that they had done it. And so that's a really good specific example of where the just verdicts were finally met partially because the double jeopardy law was lifted. So I got my students to research the Stephen Lawrence case. They focus on the police and the processing errors, the evidence that was collected, the timeline of what happened with the suspects, the suspect profiles, the difficulties the case encountered. So we have done Stephen Lawrence before, but this was an opportunity for my students to revise that. I then got them to watch the interview with Gary Dobson. It's very, very easy to find on YouTube. So this was when they called Gary Dobson in for the second time. And I got them to write down how the police officer speaks to him, what specific evidence presented, and how Dobson replies to the questioning that he is given. So when you watch the clip, they're only very, very short, but they're the actual interviews with Gary Dobson. And it's interesting how the police officer, for me, is extremely good in this. They cannot make any mistakes. There's already been so many mistakes made in the Stephen Lawrence case. That police officer knew his script well. He was clear. He was he was articulate. He was extremely poised and in just making sure everything was clear, everything was understood, that all his rights were given to him. So there was absolutely no way the defence of Gary Dobson could step up in court and say that there was something wrong with that interview. So it's very, very interesting to watch that one. And Gary Dobson in this interview is a good one for the staying silent. He does not reply to the questions being asked of him. We then watched the footage again of the hidden camera that was in that recorded Gary Dobson and David Norris with the rest of the group, and I got them to write down the behaviour, because at the end of the day, a suspect's character profile is very, very important, and we had so much evidence against them. But obviously the original verdict was they're not guilty. They couldn't use the hidden camera information, even though that hidden camera information showed them using racist language. It showed them prancing around with knives. It showed one of them actually carrying out the attack that was done on Stephen Lawrence. Stephen Lawrence was stabbed somewhere in the neck, shoulder area, and it shows him jumping around the room and doing a downward stabbing motion. So this obviously was recorded afterwards, after the murder of Stephen Lawrence, but we couldn't use that hidden camera information in court, and the whole profile character just did not seem to go with the verdict in the first instance. I then got them to watch the Trevor McDonald interviews, about 45 minutes long, and make notes on the conflicting stories of the suspects, the suspects' behaviour during the trial, their childhood, their upbringing, so everything. So this is a really good one to show how in the first instance the verdict was very, very unjust. There was not a just verdict. Even though the evidence was there, the just verdict was not met, and this also was because of police errors, etc., along the way. But then, because the double jeopardy was lifted, they were able to, with new evidence, the fibres found on the men's clothing, they were able to convict David Norris and Gary Dobson. However, when drawing the conclusions from this, you can draw the conclusions of how long it took to actually finally get the guilty parties in prison, how the other three were never convicted, even though, again, there was potentially enough evidence there. How, you can draw conclusions from how the police errors, again, did not lead to a just verdict. So they got them to make a list of all the errors made within the Stephen Lawrence case, and then make a list of improvements made during the Stephen Lawrence case, including the new DNA techniques. So how did we go from a case where there were so many errors to actually being able to get the men in prison? So what happened in between where improvements were made, and then what conclusions can be drawn overall? The last part for just verdicts is jury equity and nullification. As we know, juries have the right to pass the verdict they think is fair. We did this in a previous topic. Even if this goes against the law, nullifies the law, or the recommendation of the judge, the power of the jury is absolute and final. Now, for me, I've spoke of this previously, I think that is, it's fantastic that the jury are called in, that you have everyday normal people that are able to make that final decision over the judge and everyone else, and even the law. They don't have to follow the law if they do not believe that that it's fair. So if the law says it's against the law, this person is guilty, but the jury say actually the extra situations, the scenario that it's in, actually, yes, they've broke the law, but we see them as not guilty. Sometimes used because the jury thinks that to apply the law would be unfair, inhumane, or even immoral. And so I got them to research the case of Alan Blythe and make notes on the case, the plea, the judge decision, the law, and the jury decision. So Alan Blythe was a man, if I remember the case correctly, he was distributing marijuana, so again that is against the law, but he was distributing it to his mother who had cerebral palsy, I think, and was in severe pain, and it was so again, please do look into this and to get your details correct, it was the only thing that helped relieve her pain, and the jury found him not guilty, even though the judge and the law said he has broke the law, he needs to be put away. The jury thought it was just inhumane, unfair, and immoral to put him away when he wasn't distributed to the wider population, he was simply doing it out of love for his mum. But sometimes his power is misused. So, for example, white jurors in the USA acquitted people charged with violent racist attacks and involvement with the Ku Klux Klan. So, the areas that we've spoke about in previous topics, the racist, the racial bias, the gender bias, the political bias, can also play. So it sometimes means the verdicts are not just. Number 2, safe and unsafe verdicts. A safe verdict. So the difference between a safe verdict and a just verdict. A safe verdict depends on the evidence and procedures being correctly used and followed. A just verdict is where the guilty are found guilty and the innocent are found innocent. And so they can be connected. They're part of the same thing. But the safe verdict is based on the evidence and that everything's been done properly. And the just verdict is that the just sentencing, the just decision has been made. A safe verdict is one where it is in line with all the evidence presented and where all the correct legal proceedings have taken place. The evidence has to pass the criteria for the evidential test of the full code test of the CPS. So it has to be admissible, reliable and credible. Again, you can see the links to previous topics here quite easily. On unsafe verdict, when mistakes are made in terms of evidence or court procedures. So a lot of the cases we've studied question the evidence and how the evidence and the mistakes that were made. So Adam Scott, when it was contaminated, you've got the bra strap from Meredith Kircher that was contaminated and not found straight away. You have other court proceedings where Bromley, who was in the Damilola Taylor case, she got far too far through and should have been seen by the CPS much sooner as not a valid witness. So there's been a lot of mistakes made, and this has made it that either the verdicts have been not guilty or the process has taken years and years and years. Such mistakes in the presentation of evidence or court procedures can lead to miscarriages of justice, normally someone being found guilty and sentenced when they did not do it. A wrongful conviction is another type of unsafe verdict, but this is where the trial process was incorrectly followed. The guilt or the innocence of the defendant is not conclusive. So again, for me, Jeremy Bamber, from the evidence that's presented, the physical, strict evidence, for me, it's not conclusive that he did it. It is not conclusive that he did it from just the evidence that was presented. Not the backstory, not his personal character, none of that. That just based on the evidence collected, it's not conclusive. And there's going to be a slide on the next bit for miscarriage of justice specifically. The judge may have allowed evidence they shouldn't have, such as Sally Clark's case, letting Sir Roy Meadows' statistics be used, or the jury may have been subject to tampering or intimidation. So, miscarriages of justice. I got my students to jump straight into this one because we've talked about these cases many, many times. So I got my students to do more of the research here. So miscarriages of justice, can you think of any miscarriages of justice in the cases we have studied? So I got them to again think about what we've already covered and any cases that they can talk about. For each one they identified, I wanted to know the length of time served in prison and the reason for the sentence being overturned. And then I also got them to look out for tampering with the evidence, fabricated evidence, the info about the suspect, the lack of available intelligence such as DNA testing, and inaccurate or withheld evidence. So Sally Clark is the obvious one for this again. There is information that goes for every single one of them, but also many of the other cases as well. There is, there's evidence to back those up. I got them to then research Timothy Evans, who was hanged in 1950 for the murders of a woman and a child. And again, it was found later that he was innocent. And I got them to watch and make notes on the miscarriage of justice from Maxwell Comfort case. And again, if you just Google it, you'll find it on YouTube quite easily. And I got them once more to follow those proceedings to see what they identify and what to look out for. Number 4, just sentencing. A fair trial is important, but so is a just sentence at the end of it. A judge can refer to the sentence's guidelines for advice on what sentence to pass. However, this discretion can lead to wide variation of sentences passed. Most crimes have a range of sentences available. The judge should consider mitigating and aggravating circumstances in making their decisions. So mitigating are all the circumstances, aggravating things that caused or aggravated the situation, made it worse, made it better, and just the bigger picture around the crime itself. So again, think like we did back in the first year, the ripple effect. You know, don't just focus on the pebble in the middle, focus on the wider ripples as well. So, for example, premeditated or spur of the moment. If it's premeditated, it's murder. If it's spur of the moment, it could be seen more as manslaughter. The age of the perpetrator, the impact on the victims, the past offences, the plea, which again is all the reasons why it's shocking that in the Stephen Lawrence case, they could not find enough to find the men originally guilty. That yes, it seemed quite spur of the moment, but there's a lot of evidence to show that there was racist behaviour, racist comments going right back to when they were at school, the use of weapons and things right back to when they were at school. The age of the perpetrators, they weren't particularly young when they did this. The impact on the victims, obviously Stephen Lawrence died, it was seen as a hate crime, it really just shook the nation. Past offences, they had a lot of criminal behaviour, including themselves and their families, so they were within this cycle of criminality, and the plea itself, they all pleaded not guilty rather than just admitting it and then taking a sentence afterwards. So I then got my students to look at just sentencing, and due to judicial discretion, this leads to similar cases resulting in different sentences. And researchers make notes on the following: unduly lenient sentences, including the case of John Dennis. So John Dennis was given an unduly lenient sentence. I can't remember what it was that he did. But then once it was re-looked at, he was then given a more serious sentence. So again, look at what he did, what was the original sentencing, what was the sentence give afterwards. Unduly harsh sentences, including cases where people receive harsh sentences when linked to riots across the UK. So when we had the London riots, the Manchester riots, etc., there was a really hard line going on this. It might be because of penal populism, I'll come to that one in a second, but a very hard line was taken on these people. So there's many cases of where people were convicted of crimes and given really harsh sentencing that just was not in line with previous sentencing for the same act, and just seemed completely unduly harsh. So there was one example where I think she was an older lady, bought something, someone knocked on her door, and she bought an item that they were selling. It happened to be something that was looted from a shop. So during the riots, there was lots of looting. They got, equipment, machinery, technology, etc. This person went and knocked on her door and she bought it. I think she was sentenced to about 6 months in prison for something, and again, it's... Would it have been that harsh if it wasn't into the riots and the point that was trying to be proved? You've also got moral panics, including how the mods and rockers were treated, and the Stanley Cohen's research. That's going right back to, I think, 1.3, 1.4 potentially from the first year. And then finally, penal populism. My class could not remember what penal populism was, so I'll remind you as well. Penal populism is where decisions are made about sentencing based on popularity, but it's popularity of the government. So if a party wants to become popular and get lots of votes, they might say, we're going to take a really hard line on crime so that people go, yes, we must vote for them. Or in order to remain popular, if there's an election coming up, they will make, again, a really hard line towards certain crimes or be more lenient towards other crimes in order to remain popular with the society who are voting them in. All right, folks, I hope you found that one useful. Good luck with any upcoming control assessments that you might be doing. If you've got any comments or questions, please pop them below. Don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up if you did like it. Otherwise, thanks very much, everybody. Bye for now.